And now, the President of the United States.
Hello, everybody. I want to thank everybody for coming out to my very first press conference as United States President. What an honor it is. My inauguration was great. I want to thank everybody that came out. So all of you press people came out there, covered it. Good for you. So let's get right into the questions.
Mr. President, how do you feel about the vote in the United Nations concerning Israeli settlements? How do you plan to act in the future with these kinds of resolutions?
A great question. About such a hot topic today. Let me first start off by saying that I'm really glad that the U.S.'s views were represented in this manner. I was glad that the former president had ordered a U.S. Abstention from voting. I support that action totally. I don't think that voting against it would have been a great idea. It would have been almost a disservice to the rest of the world by preventing such a topic being discussed in the way that it is today. But I think that voting for the resolution would have been wrong for our close ally, Israel. So I think that the way that we handled the situation was great. Now let me continue by saying that the U.S. will no longer support Israel in the topic in the subject of relations with Palestine unilaterally. I don't think that we have in the past, but I know that there are a lot of people in my party, in some in the other party, the minority party, that wish that the U.S. would support Israel, my bad, with more vigor instead of how much we support them now. My administration will not take that course. We will act in support of our close ally, Israel. We have been an ally of Israel ever since Israel became a country, really. And it is important that we keep that spirit today. But we're no longer going to be acting in supporting Israel over Palestine. I think that in that topic that subject, we want there to be a lasting peace in that both Palestine's needs and Israel's needs be met. And I think that Israeli settlements are going to be a hot topic. With that being said, the U.S. is not fearful of any Israeli retaliations for no longer supporting them in the subject of subject of Palestine unilaterally.
Mr. President, what's your take on allowing people to add Bitcoin to their IRAs?
Another great question about such an important kind of topic. If you turn on the news, you almost can't get by without seeing something that has to do with retirement savings. And I always find those commercials kind of funny. But saving for retirement is a serious thing. A lot of people, it's important that we save for retirement. I read a report, a news story really, a couple of weeks ago saying that millennials are going to have to start working double to save enough for retirement, and that's simply not okay. I think that saving for retirement, having money after you stop working, is going to be a problem that my administration is going to approach and try to figure out some answers to. But as far as adding Bitcoin to IRAs, I think that it's going to be something great. I was reading in a report about this subject that if you put in a certain amount of money back in 2011, you would almost have $1 million in Bitcoin now. But Bitcoin is a very volatile currency, and it's not the greatest. I think that once Bitcoin is able to stabilize more as a currency, it may be better. But I think that for now, as far as saving for retirement, Bitcoin's a great option. And with that being said, I think that some government kind of regulation, scrutiny put into saving using Bitcoin will be needed. But I think that it's really a great thing. I'm glad to see that it's taking place.
Mr. President, any comments on the latest report by the Justice Department declaring that Chicago Police Department abused civil rights?
Yeah, great question. Not a great topic. The Chicago Police Department abusing civil rights. It's not okay. Today is Martin Luther King Day, and we see a lot of the problems with Chicago Police Department and things that they've done that people have called questionable. We see it affecting the black community. We see black youth or black males being killed. I mean, the surge in widely known killings of unarmed black men have grown in the past 2 or 3 years, as far as like it being covered immensely by the media. But these things are not okay. The things that I read, I have these sort of little notes about things that may come up, and my staff was kind enough to put some things from the Justice Department report. Long foot chases, any unreasonable shootings. Okay, first of all, things should never result in a shooting unless it's absolutely necessary. I understand that when police officers, they're chasing somebody, it's a in the moment kind of thing where they might not be able to think the situation through. They might see that this person's turning around, he's obviously going to pull a gun on me, but that's not okay. I think just shooting somebody because you feel like it's going to happen is wrong. But I understand, and to any police officers out there that may be hearing this, I understand how you're coming, where you may be coming from, and I think that if I was a police officer, I might feel the same. So I think that it's not okay for people to end in shootings, but we need to make more of an effort to train police officers on how to react. Instead of having their gun out, have their taser out. So when that person does turn around, they pull out, they tase them, and they don't shoot them. So we don't have more fatalities. Another thing is bringing gang members into rival gang territory as a means for information. That's just wrong. Gangs are an issue in America, and it's one of my goals of the administration to figure out how to bring down gang violence and to discourage youth from joining gangs. But that's a topic for another time. Using somebody's gang affiliations against them as a means to extract them, as a means to threaten them, really, because you're bringing them. If you bring a Crip into a blood territory, that Crip is going to be threatened. It's not okay for the police to use that as a means for getting information. It's morally wrong. It's morally objectionable, and I really think that that's awful that they'd be doing that. Another thing is tasers being used when it is not required. Using excessive force goes back to that kind of thing that I mentioned earlier with the foot chases ending in shootings, and now we see people just using tasers when they're not needed. The use of excessive force is a problem, and I feel like it's a root. It's when you go to the roots of evil, you'll find that along the way. The use of force. It's somewhere up here, and then here's the roots. The use of force, I feel like, kind of stems from fear, and fear is the root of all evil, right? It's fear of people. So I think what we need to do is we need to get the community and the police to come together as one, to understand that they're all Chicagoans, and they all need to work together. I think when you know that you're in it, when you know you shouldn't be fearful, you're going to be less likely to use that excessive force. Another thing, inadequate review of excessive force violations. Again, with the excessive force thing, I think this one's is one of the bigger issues because the Chicago Police Department is not reviewing these force violations, and that's terrible, really terrible that they aren't pursuing these people, the officers that may be breaking rules, breaking laws. And the last one things is the low morale from policemen and feeling of abandonment from the city and the public. This one I feel like is one of the worst of all. I understand that any things ending in shootings and bringing gang members into other gang territories. Those are all bad, but I really feel like the sort of root of a lot of these things. When what I mentioned fear, and the fear of the community by police officers. I feel like this kind of comes from there, that feeling of abandonment, like you're no longer one of them and you're almost like somebody from the outside looking in. And I feel like that causes police officers to act a little bit more recklessly. And I feel like, again, there needs to be an effort, not on the federal level, not on the state level, but on the city level, to bring that police department and and all the communities together. I think that's really going to help with morale and help with that feeling of abandonment that the police department has. But for the previous things that I mentioned, I feel like it's going to be my job as Commander-in-Chief to appoint a special prosecutor to go and investigate these actions and see what kind of legal action needs to be done, because these things cannot go, they can't go reported but then unpunished. There needs to be consequences, so that that if you shoot somebody and they didn't need to be killed, if you shoot somebody and it ends in a death, and you didn't need to do that was an excessive force violation, there is going to be consequences. And I don't feel like we see enough of those today. Thank you for your question.
Mr. President, can I get some comments on Congress's attempt to get rid of the Office of Government Ethics?
Great question. I was disappointed that this even kind of came up in the first place. What's the point of taking away the Office of Government Ethics? The Office of Government Ethics, it exists to make sure that the government is ethical. This really kind of goes, you gotta look at this really deep. You gotta look down, you have to see, ethics, really. Our democracy is supposed to be built on accountability. If somebody knows that their representative or senator is not doing what they need to be doing in the government, that they can vote them out. And people are so busy these days that it's a little bit harder for them to stay up to date with everything that a congressman or a senator is doing. So the Office of Government Ethics kind of helps them with saying, like, okay, so these are the things that are going on. They investigate ethics violations. I was disappointed that this even came up. I'm so glad that that the vote didn't go through, that there's not the Office of Government Ethics still exists. And I would urge that anybody that has the idea of returning to this and trying to take away the Office of Government Ethics, completely rethink that idea, because if you did that would basically compromise our democracy and compromise the values of the power in the people and not in the hands of the greedy. But thank you for your question.
Mr. President, could you give us your take on the Israeli-Palestine peace talks in Paris this weekend?
I'm so glad that you brought this topic up. The Paris peace talks between Israel and Palestine are they're critical. We started off this press conference by talking about Israeli settlements, and that's obviously going to be a thing that comes up in these talks, is how will Israel manage these settlements that they have in Palestinian territory. The U.S. will obviously be very interested in what goes on between these talks. I know that my Secretary of State has already left and gone there to scout out and maybe meet with some of the diplomats. But the U.S. doesn't want to be directly involved in the peace. It's my opinion that if the U.S. is directly involved in that kind of thing, we may compromise it. The U.S. wants to see a peace, and I feel like if the U.S. it goes in there and tries to make a peace for two other nations, we're going to see more problems like what we're seeing now. We don't have a peace between Israel and Palestine. Now, those things may come down to cultural differences and things like that, but ultimately it's the ineffectiveness of previous peace accords, like the Oslo Accords, which were, the U.S. was obviously a key player in. And so I feel like it's important that the U.S. monitor, see what's going on, and if Israel or Palestine asks for us to step in and assist in the peace process, that we honor that nation's request. But the U.S. Will not be getting involved without being previously asked. So thank you for your question. I'll take no more questions from now. Thank you all for coming out. I'll probably have another press conference in about a month, but thank you all for coming out.